Norman Rockwell was not telling the truth about something that could have hurt his business. In 1964, he created a scene that made people of all ages cry and parents cover their kids' eyes. People didn't want to see the picture because it showed the ugly truth about America. The owners of the gallery wouldn't hang it. Newspapers did not want to print it. Rockwell painted it anyway, even though he knew it could ruin everything he had worked on. Norman Rockwell's real self is shown in the picture that almost ended his career. He was born in Harlem, New York City, on February 3, 1894, at 789 St. Nicholas Avenue. Jarvis Rockwell and Nancy Rockwell were his parents. It was his father's job his whole life to work for a cloth company in Philadelphia. It wasn't fancy, but they made it. Norman's older brother was called Jarvis. They lived together, but they were never really close. There was some religious confusion in his home because his father was Presbyterian and his mother was Episcopalian. Norman's family tree goes all the way back to 1635, when John Rockwell came to America on a ship called the Hopewell and helped settle Connecticut. This was a long time before Norman was born. He was different even when he was a little boy. When he was only 3 years old, in 1897, his father would read out loud from Charles Dickens to him. Just the stories weren't enough. That was how Dickens used words to make pictures of people. Norman saw his dad copy pictures from books. Suddenly, something inside him woke up. His mom's dad had also been an artist. Even so, he never made a lot of money and had to settle for drawing scenery. It was still sparkly, though. There were stories, pictures, and quiet fights going on in their small home. He became what he is because of that. Norman already felt like he didn't belong when he was 9 years old, in 1903. He wasn't popular at school because he was skinny and fell over a lot. He didn't like his parents either. He found comfort in drawing and felt like he had power over it. One that made sense. He drew for hours by himself, and as time went on, he started to deal with how people treated him by making jokes and exaggerating his features. In that same year, he and his family left the city and went to Mamaroneck, a small W&Y town. It altered everything. Norman liked Mamaroneck because it had quiet streets, wide open spaces, and new people. He began to like the idea of living in a small town. He became deeply interested in the art of Howard Pyle, who was a well-known artist at the time. Norman started to put away pennies to buy art materials. Noble Norman kept drawing even when money was tight because his mother was very religious. Faces, movements, and small moments were just some of the things he watched and wrote down in his sketchbook. He will always remember that mix of city and small-town life. In 1908, when Norman was 14, he made a very important choice. He dropped out of high school and went to New York's Chase School of Fine and Applied Art. His daily commute was the train from Mamaroneck to New York. Even though his family didn't have much, they did their best to help him. He learned to draw from life at Chase, where he took lessons with real naked people. He kept going even though it was shocking for a boy who had grown up in a very strict home. He was set on it. He moved on to the National Academy of Design in 1910 and then to the Art Students League of New York soon after. Thomas Fogarty, George Bridgman, and Frank Demond were some of the teachers he learned from there. He learned how to use pictures to tell stories from Fogarty. Bridgman showed him how to draw the body accurately. After that, Norman gave up on being a good artist. He understood that his talent was drawing. He wrote stories that made people feel something. He got his first big job when he was only 18 years old, in 1912. He was hired to draw 12 stories from Carl Claudy's book, Tell Me Why, with Fogarty's help. It paid him $150 to do that job. There was more to it than just the money. Whatever happened changed everything. Boys Life magazine's founder, Edward Cave, saw his work and wanted to hire him. As Norman entered the office, he looked full of hope. Cave granted him a chance. In the end, he asked him to draw over 400 pictures for a camping book. Still, Norman was only 140 pounds and 6 feet tall. He was so skinny that the Navy turned him down for being too thin during World War I. There was no need for that in 1912. His trip had started. Norman became the full-time art director of Boys Life the next year, in 1913. Not even 19 years old. For someone that young, that kind of job was unheard of. He worked hard and made a lot of pictures that changed how people in the U.S. saw the Boy Scouts. They looked great in their uniforms, and he made their faces and adventures seem real. The Boy Scout calendar became the best-selling calendar in the country by 1929 because of how famous his art was. Being successful so quickly didn't make him cocky. Instead, it made him careful. He understood how fast things could go wrong. Consequently, he worked even harder. Two artists, Norman and Clyde Forsyth, became close friends in 1914. At Boys Life, they both worked, and they rented an old barn that used to belong to the great Western artist Frederick Remington. That room felt like a holy place. Norman felt pushed by Forsyth to try new things and send his art to the Saturday Evening Post. They worked together and helped each other out. Norman got better at what he did and felt better about himself. He was no longer just an artist for the Boy Scouts. His size was growing. Norman was 20 years old when he talked his family into moving to New Rochelle in 1915. It was a good strategy. In New Rochelle, the best artists lived. Studios were there for artists like Joseph Leyendecker, who was one of Norman's biggest influences. And Norman was pushed even more by being in that artistic space. In New York City, he made new friends, found teachers, and stayed in touch with people in this field. Spending money on that move was risky, but it led to opportunities he would not have had otherwise. The year 1916 then came. Norman was 22. All of that changed that year. He finally sent the Saturday Evening Post his work. In May 1916, he got his first cover. It was like a loud boom. He had made 6 covers for the Post by January 1917, long after the first one came out. Others noticed. The Post was called the best show window in America in a full-page ad in Life magazine. It all started with Norman's work, but they did well quickly and hard. Norman was tired by the time he was 25. He quit his job at Boys Life to work on the Post full-time. Already, he had made 25 covers and drawn dozens of pictures. It went very fast. Outside it looked like everything was fine, but Norman still had doubts. He started to feel very bad about his looks, his name, and even his place in the world around 1911. He once said, "All I had was the skill to draw," which I didn't think meant much. But he didn't give up. He used those feelings to make art. He painted people who were shy, nervous, or felt like they were being ignored. He did this, and it made millions of Americans feel like they were seen. Roger E. Rockwell married Irene O'Connor, a schoolteacher 3 years his senior, in the summer of 1916. In that same year, he had just put out his first cover for the Saturday Evening Post. They didn't know each other very well when he asked her to marry him at a New Rochelle boarding house. There were some strange feelings from the beginning, though. Irene wanted her home life to be normal. Norman had to keep going. He was totally engrossed in his drawings and would often lose himself in them and forget about everything else. Their marriage ended without having any children. A few years later, he quietly told someone something very sad. "I found out she didn't love me after we were married for a while." Despite that, the marriage lasted for almost 14 years. They decided to go on different vacations in 1929, right after the stock market crash. Not long after that, Irene filed for divorce in Reno. Norman was becoming a national star even though his personal life was going apart. He made 25 covers for the Saturday Evening Post between 1916 and 1919. Many of them had themes related to World War I. A boy in one asked if a short man could be a fighter. His work could be found all over. He was even in full-page ads in Life magazine to get people to sign up for their magazine. But despite all of his success, Norman was only 22 years old and couldn't handle it all. Suddenly, he felt anxious and like he couldn't meet everyone's needs. His friend Clyde Forsyth saw that Norman would disappear for a while every once in a while because he was afraid that people would forget about him. His style was changing by 1920. It looked more polished and less like a picture. Some very good artists were praising him, and it was clear that his master, George Bridgman, had helped him grow. However, the stress did not end. It all got too much for Norman, and he had what was whispered to be a mental breakdown. To get better, he had to take a break. Around this time, he became good friends with the well-known artist J.C. The man he looked up to was Leyendecker. The crash changed everything. He was approximately 20 years old, already carrying a lot of weight, as the most famous magazine artist in the United States. Norman did more than just magazine covers as the 1920s went on. His face was wanted by big brands for their ads. In 1923, he created an ad for Jell-O that showed a happy family with everyone smiling. His style would be known for that kind of warmth. He also did work for Life, Leslie's Weekly, Country Gentleman, Literary Digest, and Judge. These ads made him a lot of money and let him try new things. However, the stress never really went away. In 1929, he and Irene chose to go on different summer trips while they were staying at Louisville Landing. Norman went to France, Austria, and Spain to see museums. He told Irene she was in love with someone else when he got back. She needed to get a divorce. The news hurt Norman a lot, even though he liked to flirt with women. They got a divorce on January 13, 1930. His friend Clyde Forsyth took him to Alhambra, California, right away to hide. That's when he painted The Doctor and the Doll. Forsyth set him up with Mary Barstow, a 14-year-old math teacher who wanted to be a writer. After a few months, Norman married her in her parents' backyard on April 17, 1930. They had 3 boys soon after: Jarvis, Thomas, and Peter. Norman's mental health was getting worse again, though. In 1933, he was taken to the hospital for what was called nervous exhaustion. Every week, millions of people saw his work, but no one knew how much pain he was in. He tried to reignite his love by getting Mary to go with him to Europe that same year. Little Jarvis, who was only 5 months old, came with them. He looked at Rembrandt and other old masters in Paris. He wasn't motivated, though. He fell into depression. He began to call himself a fake. He thought that his Saturday night newspaper spreads didn't mean anything compared to the great art in museums. He had such bad thoughts that he thought about putting his life an end. There is a deep scar from that trip. In 1935, a new chance came up. People asked him to draw pictures for Mark Twain's books Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Even though he didn't want to at first, he agreed to do it. He studied Twain's hometown of Hannibal, Missouri, by going there and taking a lot of reference shots, which was unusual for serious painters at the time. The pictures came out in 1936 and 1940, but he felt nervous when he looked back on them. There were subtle racial stereotypes in some of the pictures. As time went on and the civil rights movement grew, Norman said he felt bad about how he had presented some people. In 1938, Norman and Mary bought a home in Arlington, Vermont, that was on 60 acres. At first, it looked like they had everything they needed for a peaceful life for their family. People smiled at square dances and town meetings, but things were really going badly. Mary was drinking more than before. He wrote in his diary that she seemed distant and angry when she drank. The simplest things, like swimming in the river on their land, were too much for him. Despite his claim that the water was too cold, he was actually always worried. Norman began seeing the famous psychologist Erik Erikson for therapy in 1939. Erikson had escaped Nazi Germany. Erikson showed him that many of his happy drawings were really ways for him to deal with being alone as a child. It had been cold and detached with Norman's mother. As a kid in New York, he never felt like he fit in anywhere. His drawings of loving, content families made him wish he had them. That is what the treatment helped him see. It made him stronger to keep painting important things. During the 1942 election, he got the idea for 4 works from President Roosevelt's speech about freedom: free speech, free religion, free food, free shelter, and free fear. They didn't like what he pitched to the Saturday Evening Post. They were afraid that readers would be upset by the idea, but Norman was so sure of it that he paid for the project himself. It took him months to finish the painting, which was based on his friends in Vermont. In 1943, the 4 Freedoms went on tour to 16 towns and sold $132 million worth of war bonds. That's more than $2 billion today. The works were seen by more than 1.2 million people. Norman even signed autographs. Nevertheless, not all were glad. In the freedom of worship painting, people of different races and faiths were seen praying together. This made some Americans angry. People sent Rockwell hate mail saying that he supported mixing races and communist ideas. There were towns in the South that wouldn't put up the posters. Even so, the show was a huge hit. There was a terrible event that year. Late in 1943, Norman's whole studio caught fire and burned down. More than 100 paintings, props, outfits, and his own things, which were worth about $100,000 at the time, were stolen. Yesterday's over $1.5 million. Some neighbors said it was because of the smoke from his pipe. Others, like Norman, thought it might have been set on fire. He had a fight with a friend over who owned what land. Absolutely nothing was proven. It was important that he was killed, along with his work, supplies, and favorite pipes. When he was last seen, the people of the town gave him new pipes as a sign of love. His painting of Rosie the Riveter was also made in 1943 to feature on the front page of the Saturday Evening Post. Rosie was strong and sure of herself, so she stomped on Hitler's book. The character was based on Mary Louise Doyle, a 19-year-old secretary. It made Norman feel bad that he made Rosie look bigger than her real-life figure. But while the picture became famous, a lot of angry men read it. They said it wasn't normal, so they stopped getting magazines. They did not want women to work in positions meant for guys. Norman did, however, help make a new type of American hero. In spite of all his success, his marriage was breaking up. I think Mary drank more in the 1940s and 1950s. Going to the Austin Riggs Center for Mental Health Care was necessary for her. Their home in Vermont was 90 minutes away by car. It happened that she stayed there for months at a time. She even had electroshock treatment in 1952. Norman felt by himself. The women he painted helped him deal with his feelings and gave him close, quiet ties that kept him going. When Mary needed to be closer to the treatment center, they moved to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, in 1953. He also started going to therapy to deal with the stress of his fame, his family's sadness, and the weight of everything. Norman Rockwell's book, My Adventures as an Illustrator, came out in 1946. Despite being seen as a symbol of American happiness, he talked about how he often felt insecure and afraid of losing. He wrote about how he was always stressed, how he had to meet goals, and how he tried to be perfect. But he didn't say anything much worse. Now, a lot of people think he used amphetamines to keep up with the fast work pace. He painted happy families, small-town life, and smiling faces, but behind the scenes he was dealing with sadness and anxiety. The book didn't include that. The story wasn't the whole one. It was nice and safe. Later, in 1951, Rockwell moved his family to Massachusetts Stockbridge. Even though most people thought it was just for the peace and quiet, his second wife, Mary, was actually very sick. She had a lot of problems with alcoholism and sadness. At the Austin Riggs Center, a well-known mental hospital in town, she was getting help. Electroshock treatment was even done on her. Rockwell worked very hard to pay for everything. She did magazine covers and cereal ads that helped pay for her hospital bills. Even though his art showed a beautiful America, his real home was full of fear and pain. It looked like a dream in Stockbridge. Only a few places offered the kind of mental health care Mary needed, so they went there. Some new problems started in his own family in 1953. In public, his son Peter said that his father had been emotionally detached and focused on his work. It turned into a scandal. Rockwell's grandson found letters that told a different story. Their presence showed that Norman had attempted to be there. He was there for his kids. He helped them with their art projects and even built Jarvis, the oldest, a small workshop. Even so, Norman's need to be perfect sometimes got in the way. He had to borrow money from the bank to just stay alive while he painted the same magazine cover over and over again. It took him almost a year to finish. The more he tried to make things perfect, the less time he had for his family. In 1959, Mary had a heart attack and died right away. Norman got beat up. Artists tried to hide their sadness in their work, but mags didn't want that. The darker, more emotional songs were turned down. They wanted happiness. According to his doctor Eric Erickson, "You paint your happiness, but you don't live it." That wounded me. Trying to keep working while hiding his sadness made him even more worn out. Norman married again in October 1961. The third woman he married, Molly Punderson, used to be a teacher. It was 67 degrees outside, and she was 65. He was honest with everyone when he said he married her because she was organized and he needed help. He could no longer handle the business side of his art. Before Molly came along, he had been having a hard time with Mary's illness and his own emotional health. Everyone was shocked when they got married, and they were together until he died. The story might not have been about love. Although it wasn't perfect, it gave him stability at a pivotal moment. The year 1963 then came. He quit the Saturday Evening Post after 47 years. The last cover he did was of President John F. Kennedy after he was killed. He created 321 of the magazine's covers in total. But Norman thought things had changed and he needed to too. He had painted enough happy white families. His pictures of Black Americans had to be in the background or doing work for the magazine. He said that I turned the worst possible worlds into the best ones. It's no longer relevant. He was 69 years old and ready to do what was right. In 1964, he started working for Look magazine. Their permission let him paint what he really cared about: real pain, civil rights, and unfairness. The threats came right away, though. Letters of hate were sent. Some people suspected he was betraying his race. Others told him he'd feel bad if he kept drawing black kids or being racist. He didn't stop, even though some of the threats were so bad that they put his life in danger. Despite being 70 years old, he kept going. He painted the problem we all have that same year. It showed U.S. Marshals walking with Ruby Bridges, a black girl who is 6 years old, to school. It had insults and a tomato on the wall behind her. It really shocked me. Readers were very angry. A huge number of people canceled their memberships. Even though Rockwell used a girl from the area as a model, the message was very clear. The American people didn't want to see this, but it was the truth. Lastly, Rockwell painted how he really felt. He spent the whole 1960s trying to make up for the time he painted black people as servants. He understood what he had done was wrong. He talked to campaigners and civil rights groups to make sure his new work was respectful and correct. It was not important for him to be seen as a white hero. He wanted black people to be great in their own stories. It was okay. He altered. Something terrible happened in late 1964. James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were killed in Mississippi while working for human rights. They wanted to get black people to sign up to vote. It was done by the Ku Klux Klan and the cops in the area. These people's bodies were discovered buried in a dam. Rockwell was awake all night. He had scary dreams. All of that time and energy went into a picture he called Murder in Mississippi. They were shown in their last moments. Torches were the only source of light, and the killer's shadows were all around them. For 5 weeks, he did nothing but work on that. It hurt him to paint that, but he had to do it. He painted new kids in the neighborhood in 1967. In an area that had just become less segregated, it showed black and white kids meeting for the first time. Although it wasn't angry, it was quiet and full of feeling. He was very tired and 73 years old, but his pen is still giving him trouble. Something strange took place in 1978. Artist Norman Rockwell had 7 paintings stolen from a store in Minnesota. The state had never seen such a big art theft before. The stolen items included a picture from 1919 called Taking a Break. That one was found in a New Jersey home in 2017, 40 years after it was stolen. It was bought for a few dollars many years ago after being broken during a game of pool, but Rockwell had other plans. A biographer named Deborah Solomon wrote a book about him in 2013 that said he had hidden sexy drawings and might have repressed sexual urges, even toward guys. She showed him notes and entries from his notebook, one of which was about a young assistant he seemed to really like. Some experts thought that these clues were real. Aside from Rockwell's own granddaughter, others said the claims were false and cruel. It made people wonder more about who he really was behind the public image, even though the truth is still not clear. The Presidential Medal of Freedom was given to Rockwell by President Gerald Ford on January 10, 1977. People in normal life could only get that award, but Rockwell didn't go. Jarvis, his son, took it for him. At that point, he was 83 years old and very sick. Outside of work, he told people that he felt like he had sold out sometimes. Despite making a lot of money, he gave up making more personal art to do business work. He thought about whether he had missed his true calling. His death date was November 8, 1978, and he was 84 years old. After he died, people learned that he owed about $50,000 in therapy bills that were not paid. Those dollars are worth around $200,000 now. He had spent his whole life painting happy scenes for the world while also dealing with worry and inner turmoil. The bills explained something that his works never did. In 2004, something amazing was found in the home of another artist, Donald Trachta, behind a fake wall. It was Rockwell's first version of one of his most famous works, Breaking Home Ties. The man made an exact copy to hide the real one, most likely because he was being divorced badly. It was auctioned off in 2006 and sold for $15.4 million. The find made people think, what other originals were out there, hidden in closets or behind walls?